Every morning, you prick your finger, watch that tiny drop of blood surface, and feel a familiar wave of dread as you wait for the digital monitor to dictate how the rest of your day is going to go. You are caught in a painful, exhausting cycle of counting carbohydrates, swallowing pills, and feeling like your own body has entirely betrayed you. But the most shocking truth is that the medical system prescribing your treatment actively profits from making sure you never actually heal. You have likely been sitting in brightly lit examination rooms for years, listening to well-meaning endocrinologists tell you that type 2 diabetes is an inevitable, progressive disease of aging, and that the absolute best you can hope for is to carefully manage your slow decline. They point to your rising hemoglobin A1C, shake their heads with sympathetic sighs, and hand you yet another prescription for a higher dose of medication or synthetic insulin. But what they are completely failing to explain to you is the brilliant, highly responsive metabolic engine operating inside your cells. The hidden culprit behind your chronically high blood sugar is not merely a broken pancreas or bad genetics. What you are experiencing is a severe state of cellular insulin resistance, a condition perfectly cultivated by the very dietary guidelines and pharmaceutical treatments you are being explicitly instructed to follow. The conventional medical establishment often completely ignores this root cause because teaching you how to drain the toxic, overflowing sugar from your cells naturally does not generate recurring quarterly revenue for pharmaceutical conglomerates. Reversing your disease at the root level is terrible for business, but keeping you in a state of perfectly managed sickness is the ultimate economic model. Today, we are going to radically expose and dismantle this system. We will explore 4 deeply hidden reasons why hospitals and clinics actively keep you diabetic, and more importantly, how you can entirely break free from their grasp. By the time we finish our comprehensive conversation today, you will possess a clear, highly actionable, and rigidly science-backed roadmap to completely reverse your insulin resistance, reclaim your metabolic freedom, and restore the vibrant, energetic longevity you deeply deserve. Before we dive into these paradigm-shifting biological revelations together, I want to formally and warmly welcome you to our growing community. If you are thoroughly exhausted by the endless pharmaceutical runaround and ready to become the absolute authority over your own biological future, consider subscribing to our channel. We share the kind of deep dive, strictly science-backed senior health tips that mainstream doctors simply do not have the luxury of time to explain during a rushed 15-minute clinical visit. And because we are a dedicated community that actively supports one another on this journey, I would love to know exactly who I am speaking to today. Drop a quick comment down below and tell me where are you watching from right now, and how long have you been struggling with the frustrating advice of the standard medical system? It is always so inspiring to see proactive, intelligent people from all corners of the world coming together to take control of their health destiny. Let us begin our journey of truth by dismantling the most universally accepted, utterly devastating nutritional lie pushed by every major hospital network and dietetic association in the world. The first deeply entrenched reason hospitals ensure you remain a lifelong patient is their unwavering dogmatic enforcement of a high-carbohydrate, low-fat diet. If you look at the tray they serve you in a cardiac or diabetic recovery ward, it is a masterclass in metabolic dysfunction. You will typically find a carton of skim milk, a cup of orange juice, a bowl of instant oatmeal, and 2 slices of dry whole wheat toast. This menu is a direct holdover from the flawed dietary guidelines established in the late 1970s, which incorrectly demonized dietary fat as the primary driver of human disease. To replace the calories lost from removing healthy fats from the public diet, the food and medical industries replaced them with cheap, heavily subsidized grains and starches. They created a narrative that as long as a carbohydrate is labeled as complex or whole grain, it is perfectly healthy for a diabetic. But human biochemistry does not care about food marketing labels. Whether you consume a highly refined pastry or a bowl of organic quinoa, your salivary amylase and intestinal enzymes aggressively break those starches down into single glucose molecules. By the time that oatmeal reaches your small intestine, it enters your bloodstream as a massive tidal wave of pure sugar. When your blood sugar spikes, your pancreas is forced to secrete a corresponding wave of insulin to shuttle that glucose out of the blood and into your muscle and liver cells. But here is the critical physiological breaking point that your doctor rarely has the time to explain. Your cells have a maximum storage capacity. After decades of consuming the standard Western diet, your cells are completely engorged with glucose and toxic fat droplets. They are entirely full. When insulin arrives to deliver more sugar from your morning toast, the cells actively resist the signal. They refuse to open their receptor doors. This is the very definition of insulin resistance. Because the sugar cannot enter the cells, it backs up into your bloodstream, causing your blood glucose monitor to flash red. The hospital's solution is never to stop feeding you the sugar. Their solution is to prescribe heavy medications that artificially whip your exhausted pancreas into producing even more insulin, essentially trying to shove more sugar into a suitcase that is already tearing at the seams. The clinical science exposing the total failure of this high-carbohydrate approach is absolutely undeniable. A landmark, peer-reviewed clinical trial published in the prestigious Annals of Internal Medicine by metabolic researchers at Duke University revealed a staggering biological reality. When patients suffering from severe type 2 diabetes were taken off the standard high-carbohydrate hospital diet and instead placed on a very low-carbohydrate, high-fat ketogenic diet, a massive 95% of those patients were able to completely eliminate or dramatically reduce their need for all diabetic medications within a mere 6 months. Imagine your metabolism as a flooded kitchen where the sink is overflowing. The hospital's dietary advice is akin to leaving the faucet running at full blast while handing you a tiny teaspoon to bail out the water. Your actionable, life-changing takeaway is to confidently reject the outdated food pyramid and fundamentally redesign your plate. You must drastically restrict your intake of grains, starchy root vegetables, and all liquid sugars, replacing them with highly satiating, nutrient-dense proteins and healthy, stable fats. Tomorrow morning, bypass the cereal aisle entirely and instead consume 3 pasture-raised eggs cooked in grass-fed butter, accompanied by a generous portion of sliced avocado. This specific, fat-adapted macronutrient profile produces virtually zero spike in your blood glucose and requires almost no insulin to metabolize, finally allowing your overworked pancreas a chance to heal while your cells slowly begin to burn off their deeply stored, toxic sugar reserves for fuel. Moving smoothly along to the next heavily guarded, highly profitable clinical practice, we must confront the terrifying reality of how treating the symptom actively accelerates the underlying disease. The second reason the medical system fails to cure your diabetes is their tragic, deeply flawed reliance on the insulin escalation paradigm. When you are diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, the standard operating procedure is to focus exclusively on lowering your blood sugar number by any means necessary. When oral medications like metformin inevitably begin to lose their efficacy because you are still consuming dietary carbohydrates, the physician will invariably transition you to synthetic insulin injections. But there is a fundamental biological misunderstanding at play here. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune disease where the pancreas cannot produce insulin, making injections a literal lifesaver. Type 2 diabetes, however, is a disease of extreme insulin toxicity, clinically known as hyperinsulinemia. Your pancreas is already producing massive, wildly abnormal amounts of endogenous insulin in a desperate attempt to overcome your cellular resistance. By injecting you with even more synthetic insulin, the doctor is simply forcing that excess glucose out of your bloodstream and aggressively cramming it into your vital organs. Your liver, overwhelmed by this forced sugar delivery, has no choice but to convert the excess glucose into palmitic acid through a process called de novo lipogenesis. This creates deep inflammatory visceral fat that physically wraps around your liver, your pancreas, and your heart, choking off their function. You gain weight rapidly, your blood pressure skyrockets due to sodium retention caused by the high insulin, and your underlying cellular resistance becomes so much more severe that by your next annual checkup, the doctor will simply tell you to inject an even larger dose of the drug. It is a brilliant, perpetually recurring financial model for the pharmaceutical companies, but an absolute physiological nightmare that drives you closer to a major cardiac event. The unvarnished truth about this deadly cycle is perfectly documented in massive clinical trials that the medical establishment desperately tries to minimize. In a highly rigorous, incredibly exhaustive clinical initiative known worldwide as the ACCORD trial, which was published in the world-renowned New England Journal of Medicine, leading researchers attempted to aggressively lower the blood sugar of older diabetic patients using massive, intensive doses of insulin and other blood sugar-lowering medications. They discovered an absolutely undeniable, completely terrifying biological reality. The intensive treatment group, receiving the highest doses of insulin, actually experienced a staggering 22% higher rate of cardiovascular mortality, forcing the researchers to immediately and permanently halt the entire multi-million-dollar study to prevent further patient deaths. Picture a heavily reinforced, completely stuffed leather suitcase where you have already packed 3 weeks' worth of clothing into a bag designed for a weekend trip. The hospital's approach of prescribing more insulin is exactly like hiring a heavy machine to violently press down on the suitcase to force even more clothes inside, completely destroying the structural integrity of the bag, instead of simply taking some clothes out. To physically harness your own metabolic power and escape this deeply dangerous cycle, your actionable takeaway is to aggressively demand a completely different set of blood tests at your next appointment. Stop letting your doctor only test your hemoglobin A1C and your fasting glucose, which are late-stage indicators of metabolic failure. You must explicitly request a fasting serum insulin test. By seeing exactly how much insulin your body is already overproducing in the background, you and your doctor can shift the ultimate goal from merely lowering blood sugar with heavy drugs to actively lowering your insulin levels through intelligent carbohydrate restriction, effectively fixing the broken lock on your cellular doors rather than violently kicking the doors in. If you are finding these deep physiological insights eye-opening, and you are feeling a renewed, powerful sense of hope that you are finally ready to take back absolute control of your metabolic health from a deeply broken, profit-driven medical system, please take a quick second right now to give this video a thumbs up. It is a tiny, effortless gesture for you, but it genuinely helps our vital, truth-telling message defeat the massive corporate algorithms and reach millions of other wonderful seniors who are sitting at home right now, deeply anxious and desperately looking for real, lasting answers to their blood sugar nightmares. Now, we arrive at what might be the most fascinating, structurally profound, and entirely ignored biological reality of how your body actually disposes of glucose on a daily basis. The third hidden reason the medical establishment fails to cure your diabetes is their complete and utter disregard for the preservation and stimulation of your skeletal muscle mass. When you visit a clinic for diabetes management, the lifestyle advice is almost always centered around gentle cardiovascular activity. They will tell you to take up water aerobics, garden a bit more, or walk around the neighborhood for 30 minutes a day to manage your weight. While walking is wonderful for your mental health and basic circulation, it is highly inefficient for correcting severe insulin resistance. What they completely fail to explain to you is the brilliant, highly complex molecular machinery located inside your muscle tissue. Your skeletal muscles are the absolute largest consumer of glucose in your entire human body, acting as massive, highly efficient metabolic sinks designed to rapidly soak up the sugar floating in your bloodstream. However, as we cross into our 60s and 70s, if we are not actively lifting heavy things, we naturally experience a phenomenon known as sarcopenia, which is the steady, insidious loss of muscle fiber density and volume. When you lose muscle mass, you literally lose the physical biological storage space for your dietary carbohydrates. It is like taking a large sponge and cutting it in half every decade. Eventually, it cannot absorb the spill on the counter. But the cellular science gets even more miraculous when you apply physical resistance. Your muscle cells possess special biological transport doors called GLUT4 receptors. Under normal resting circumstances, these doors remain tightly shut and only open when insulin comes along and provides the specific chemical key to unlock them. But when you actively and aggressively contract your muscles under heavy physical resistance, the mechanical stress and the depletion of cellular energy physically force these GLUT4 doors to fly wide open, completely independent of insulin. You can physically pull massive amounts of sugar out of your blood and directly into your muscles without needing your pancreas to secrete a single drop of insulin, naturally bypassing your entire cellular resistance problem. The clinical evidence supporting this brilliant mechanism is simply staggering and impossible for honest, data-driven exercise physiologists to ignore. A heavily peer-reviewed, extensively monitored clinical trial published in the highly esteemed Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism evaluated the exact metabolic effects of resistance training on older adults suffering from severe type 2 diabetes. The researchers definitively concluded, with absolute scientific certainty, that for every 10% increase in skeletal muscle index an older adult achieved through resistance training, there was a massive, corresponding 11% absolute reduction in their overall cellular insulin resistance, completely independent of cardiovascular aerobic exercise or severe calorie restriction. Imagine your bloodstream as a completely flooded kitchen floor, and your muscles are a collection of thick, highly absorbent sponges sitting on the counter that have dried up and shrunk over the years. Doing basic cardiovascular walking is like lightly blowing a fan on the floor to dry it. But picking up heavy weights is exactly like instantly rehydrating massive industrial-sized sponges and aggressively pressing them into the flood, instantly soaking up the toxic, overflowing sugar water. Your profoundly simple, entirely life-changing, actionable takeaway here is to stop believing that a gentle evening stroll is enough to save your metabolic health. You must absolutely incorporate strict, progressive resistance training into your weekly routine, a minimum of 3 times a week. You do not need an expensive gym membership or intimidating Olympic barbells. You simply need to purchase a set of inexpensive, heavy-duty resistance bands or a pair of adjustable dumbbells to use in your living room. Focus on slow, controlled, full-body movements like bodyweight squats, chest presses, and seated rows. By actively forcing your muscles to burn and contract, you are literally building biological sugar vacuums that will aggressively pull glucose out of your bloodstream every single day, naturally reversing your disease from the inside out. Finally, we must confront a heavily guarded, highly profitable lie that operates as a piece of nutritional dogma so deeply ingrained in our society that questioning it feels entirely unnatural to most older adults. The fourth hidden reason hospitals keep you sick is their absolute relentless fear-mongering over the profound biological healing state of fasting. From the moment you were diagnosed, you have likely been aggressively instructed by hospital dietitians to eat 3 large meals a day, plus 2 or 3 snacks in between, in order to allegedly keep your blood sugar stable and prevent a hypoglycemic crash. This deeply flawed advice is specifically designed for patients who are actively injecting heavy doses of synthetic insulin, creating a terrifying, self-fulfilling prophecy where you have to constantly eat carbohydrates just to feed the dangerous drugs you are taking so you do not fall into a diabetic coma. What the medical industry completely hides from you is the profound evolutionary biology of the human body. When you are constantly eating every 3 hours from the moment you wake up until you go to bed, you are perpetually trapping your body in the fed state. In the fed state, your insulin levels are constantly elevated. When insulin is high in the bloodstream, it acts as a strict metabolic gatekeeper, making it biologically impossible for your body to access its stored body fat for energy. You are constantly overflowing with circulating energy, but entirely starving at a cellular level because your body forgot how to burn its own fuel. However, when you intentionally stop eating for a specific window of time, your digestive system empties, and your insulin levels naturally plummet to their biological baseline. Once insulin drops below a certain threshold, your body performs a miraculous metabolic switch. It stops trying to burn the sugar from your last meal, transitions away from glucose dependence, and immediately opens up your deeply stored fat cells. It begins converting that toxic visceral fat that is suffocating your liver and pancreas into pure, clean energy molecules called ketones. The unvarnished truth is perfectly hidden in massive clinical data reviews that challenge the entire foundational model of frequent eating. A landmark, highly exhaustive clinical intervention study and case report series published in the world-renowned BMJ Case Reports analyzed the exact effects of therapeutic, supervised intermittent fasting on older patients with severe, highly advanced type 2 diabetes. The researchers stated an incredibly powerful biological truth when patients engaged in structured therapeutic fasting, effectively giving their digestive systems and their pancreas a complete extended rest. A staggering 100% of the closely monitored patients in the case series were able to completely eliminate their need for all injected insulin in under 1 single month. The researchers explicitly concluded that the massive, deeply entrenched stores of toxic ectopic fat in the liver and pancreas were entirely burned away during the fasting windows, effectively regenerating the organs and permanently reversing the diabetic phenotype that had plagued them for decades. Picture your deeply overwhelmed digestive system and your exhausted pancreas as a massive, heavily industrialized manufacturing plant that has been running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 30 straight years without a single shift break. The machinery is violently overheating, the gears are completely stripped, and the conveyor belts are snapping. The hospital's advice of eating 6 times a day is exactly like forcing the factory workers to work faster and dumping more raw materials into the broken machines. Therapeutic fasting is simply pulling the massive emergency brake, entirely shutting down the factory floor for 12 to 16 hours, and allowing a specialized, highly trained crew of biological mechanics to enter the building, clean the deeply rusted gears, repair the broken machinery, and completely sweep the floors before the next shift ever begins. Your actionable takeaway here is profoundly simple, entirely free, and deeply healing for your metabolic engine. You must intentionally implement a gentle, nightly time-restricted eating window. Stop the constant grazing behavior that the pharmaceutical industry relies on to keep you medicated. Eat your final, protein-rich dinner by 6 o'clock in the evening, completely close the kitchen, and do not consume a single calorie again until 8 or 9 o'clock the next morning. This effortless 14 to 15-hour overnight fast requires zero effort while you are sleeping, yet it provides your severely overworked pancreas the absolute critical downtime it desperately requires to drop insulin levels, open your fat stores, and actively begin healing your cellular resistance. We have covered some truly groundbreaking, incredibly empowering, and historically profound physiological territory today. We have pulled back the heavy curtain on the deeply guarded natural truths the traditional hospital networks routinely ignore simply because profound wellness and massive pharmaceutical reduction cannot be patented for billions of dollars in recurring quarterly profits. We talked at extreme length about the absolutely critical necessity of abandoning the toxic, high-carbohydrate hospital diets, completely replacing massive glucose spikes with stable, healing proteins and healthy fats to stop feeding the disease. We uncovered the deeply suppressed truth about the devastating insulin escalation paradigm, proving definitively with hard cardiovascular science that aggressively treating high blood sugar with more synthetic insulin actively accelerates heart disease, making a fasting insulin test your absolute most powerful diagnostic tool. We revealed the absolutely awe-inspiring, highly intelligent metabolic reality of your skeletal muscle mass, demonstrating how mechanical resistance training physically rips open cellular doors to drain glucose from your blood without needing a single drop of endogenous insulin. And finally, we completely dismantled the terrifying myth surrounding frequent eating, proving that implementing a simple, zero-cost overnight fasting window completely halts the destructive cycle of elevated insulin, allowing your organs to physically regenerate and burn away the toxic visceral fat causing your metabolic dysfunction. As we wrap up our incredibly precious time together today, I want you to remember deep in your soul that the most dangerous, incredibly insidious myth you have ever been sold by modern society and glossy hospital brochures is that growing older has to be completely synonymous with physical fragility, metabolic decay, and an ever-growing, terrifying list of expensive, side effect-laden pharmacy prescriptions. You are not broken, and you are not destined to simply manage a slow decline. You possess incredible, vastly untapped power over your own internal biology, and your magnificent body is beautifully designed to heal itself and physically thrive when it is finally given the correct nutritional and metabolic environments. Getting older should be an absolute joyous privilege. It should be a wonderful, vibrant time to deeply enjoy the vast wisdom you have rightfully earned over decades of hard work, to travel the world with endless, abundant energy, to actively play with your grandchildren, without the constant heavy shadow of medical exhaustion dictating your every move, and to live completely free from the toxic, devastating cycle of daily injections and terrifying blood sugar readings. You fundamentally deserve to step out into the world feeling deeply protected, intensely radiant, highly confident, and entirely on your own terms. I want to hear your brilliant personal thoughts, your unique health experiences, and your ongoing victories on this continuing journey to better, completely bulletproof metabolic health. Please take a moment right now to leave a highly detailed comment down below and tell me which of these massive paradigm-shifting hospital lies shocked you the absolute most, and what specific action step are you going to bravely try first in your own life tomorrow morning. If you found this deep dive, strictly evidence-based, unapologetically honest information, valuable, empowering, and deeply helpful to your personal metabolic journey, please hit that like button right now and absolutely make sure to subscribe to our channel, because your radiant independence, your long-term cellular health, and your ultimate freedom from a completely broken medical system are absolutely worth fighting for every single day. Keep pushing forward, keep aggressively demanding the honest scientific truth from your healthcare providers, never settle for the standard pharmaceutical answers, and always remember that your absolute best, most active, most intensely vibrant, and completely disease-free days are entirely within your control and can still be well ahead of you.